Welcome to our Selah podcast. Selah is a Hebrew word that represents the idea of pausing and considering. And over these episodes, we're going to look at the life of a Christian, what it looks like to fast and pray in a season of 21 days that we're doing called Selah. My name's Nathan.
And my name's Jacob. So whether you're a member at the Refuge Church or you found us online, we just hope that these conversations would be helpful and informative. And over this season, we're going to interview our pastors here and really unpack what it looks like to prioritize a Jesus-centered life.
Well, today we've got Prabu Gupta, our children's pastor here. And today we're going to pause and consider this whole idea of how we can be spiritual leaders in our homes. Mm-hmm. And as the children's pastor, we thought, this would be perfect. So, Prabu, how you doing, man?
I'm great, man. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Doing great.
This is fun, man. We've enjoyed this and just trying to get into this idea. So the topic for today, how do we be a spiritual leader in our home? Let's just start with that idea, man. What do you think about that, and what thoughts come to mind as we consider it?
Yeah, man. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is incredible. I feel like this is my breakout podcast in a while. Just kidding. No, but when it comes to being a spiritual leader of your household, I feel like I've been in all different spectrums. Like there have been seasons in my life where I've not done it great, seasons in my life where I'm trying, seasons in my life where it's gone well, and so this is not like, I'm the authority on what this is, but the only authority we can look to is the Word of God,
Yeah.
And I think like being the spiritual leader of the household in general just draws a lot of controversy because, I know there's so many wives out there or moms out there, they're like, well, is it supposed to be the man who's supposed to be the leader? Is it but if I'm the single mom, I think where the buck stops is I think families just need a leader, right? Mm-hmm. And I think leadership is just important in any scenario, right? And so to be the spiritual household, the leader of the household, I think can go one of two ways. And I don't want to get twisted where people are saying, well, he is better than me or he is whatever. I feel like God doesn't look at anybody unequal. He looks at everybody as, hey, you have a role to play in your household, right? So when Paul writes in Ephesians, he says, hey, husbands, love your wives and wives submit to your husbands. It just alludes to us needing to make sure that we fulfill the roles that Christ has for the household.
Yeah.
And so in that, I feel like as a spiritual leader of the household, I'm called to, serve my spouse. I'm called to love the Lord with everything that I have, all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, govern, and nurture my kids. So there's a lot going on with that, but we can unpack that today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so to give our viewers and listeners some context of where we're speaking from, each of us is a father. Each of us has done ministry to people young and old, which gives us different thoughts on what it means to be a spiritual leader. I have two young ones who are coming up on 4 and 2 and a newborn that might be here by the time this airs. What about you guys?
Well, I've got 3. So I've got Riley, who's about to be 8, Quinn, who's about to be 5, and Miles, who is about to be 3 this year. Man, I've got both my kids, or my older kids, are born in January. So this month is really expensive for us. It's coming right out of Christmas, But yeah, it's a lot of fun, man. I feel like just having the kids has completely changed my perspective on a lot of things and changed my life in so many ways.
Yeah. What about you, Nathan?
Well, I'm a January baby too, so I can appreciate. Yeah. And but I'm
happy birthday, Pastor.
Well, you're just a very precious man. So I've got 3, and I'm the pawpaw in the room right now. So my oldest is 19, my son is 17, and our youngest daughter is 14. And each season, you learn so much. You kind of started with this thing of, I've had times I feel like I'm really doing well with this. Yeah. I've had times that I feel like I'm struggling. Yeah. That's called life in general,
right?
And so I'll just encourage you guys and those watching and listening. That's kind of how it goes indefinitely. You've got times when you feel really good. And you got times you feel like I am ruining everybody's life, Yeah. And so it really takes a lot of humility. And I just love what you do with the kids here at our church, and just trying to instill, the idea of growing spiritually shouldn't just happen in the church space.
Absolutely.
Right? We want to equip people so that in their homes, it can be alive and present. Yeah. And So yeah, that's kind of our context, you know, and in the next season of life. So trying to figure out how to do that with teenagers.
Yeah. So Pastor Prabu and I specifically met through doing youth ministry together.
Right. Yeah.
And you were just having maybe one kid at the time. I had no kids.
We had just gotten pregnant, and Riley was on her way.
Yeah.
That's how far back we go, man.
That's right.
I love
and I think it's funny thinking about those days of my, being really, I just turned 30, so I'm not that old, but I was freshly 23-ish and I had no kids. So my perspective of parenting and being a spiritual leader was purely from this is what you students need. And I could look at it in a really specific way. Then fast forward to around when Pastor Prabu became the children's pastor, I also briefly became the Salisbury children's pastor.
Right, yeah.
And so then the reality of ministering to little kids who might cry if you say, don't do that, was a huge wake-up call. Because with you students, you could be a bit more ruthless, Yeah. then when eventually you have your own kids and you're trying to do that, it's a far different thing because you got to take them home with you. And now you're dealing with the emotions. And so when you're talking to, how do you kind of differentiate some of your wisdom about how to minister to your own family when you're thinking of like how you minister in the church setting versus in your own household?
Yeah, I think, man, for me, and this is just my story very early on, when I became a pastor, everything was about, man, how can I win the approval of other people? But when you have that, you also have that I need to win the approval of my household, right? So I have to win the approval of my wife and my kids, and I need to be the best I can. But honestly, like that mantle is just pressure that you don't need to carry because God has called you to who you're supposed to be. And I feel like when you start compartmentalizing, well, this is how I preach to kids, and this is how I preach to youth. This is how I preach, to the on stage to the congregation. This is how I lead my wife. That's where we get into trouble. I feel like what we are called to do is love the Lord, our God with all of our soul, strength, mind, and heart. I think I got that right. Yeah.
And
you
got all of them.
It's pretty close.
It's in there.
It's in there. I'm just kidding. But no, it's once I realized, hey, I'm not trying to win anybody's approval.
There it is.
I just have to seek the Lord. I need His wisdom. I need His strength. I need His guidance in everything that I do. Now, I get to imitate who Christ is to the people around me. So whether I'm dealing with a kid, the truth is the truth, and the truth will set you free, right?
Yeah.
Like Paul writes. And I just try to be myself. And as I seek the Lord, I look for guidance on the best way to do this and to speak to kids. And kids, they're not fools, man. They're not foolish. Like they understand and they observe and they're sponges, and so they know when you're trying to talk down to them.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just tell them the truth, and as I do that, I feel like I've seen so many kids, find the Lord in that. And even in my own household, it's not about just, well, at this time I'm going to preach the gospel, and at this time I'm going to be, I want to teach their homework. It's just living life with them. And the more I seek the Lord, the more they get to see me in love with Jesus, and it makes them want to love God more.
Yeah. Yeah. Even recently I went to my son's Christmas recital, which is at a church daycare. And so he's singing songs about Jesus, and he's in the 3-year-olds class. So he's just old enough to start asking me questions about who is Jesus or what does that mean versus my other son who can't barely say Jesus.
Yeah.
So when you guys think about the context of your own kids and kind of the process of seeing them understand more and more, what's some insight for parents of like how you walk them along that journey of discovering who Jesus is?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to open communication and making sure that you establish that discipleship starts from the home, right? Like, so when people bring their kids to me, and I don't want to say this is like everybody, but you get the feeling of we live in a culture where childcare is prevalent, like we go drop our kids off, whether it's Chuck E. Cheese, hey, go play while the adults have the conversation. Hey, there's the kiddie table concept at Thanksgiving. Like all the kids go.
I'm still there sometimes.
Yeah. Kids all go eat here while the adults talk. At church, there's kids' church. And then while we do, we go after the Lord. I feel like just inviting the kids into everything that you're doing, and so that they can see that, hey, my dad cares about me emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, right? Like, and as we do that, so then you're also able to identify markers. So when they're going through when they're going through tough things or they have big questions that, from our perspective may not be as big, but from their perspective, it could be world ending, right? Like why, like the most common one I get from kids is, why does good things or bad things happen to good people, right? And kids, they keep asking that because they're searching for, what is God true? Is God who my parents say he is, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't need to search as long as you are showing your kids examples of, no, God is who he says he is, and while you're doing that in your everyday life. So, like recently we were driving to Birkdale with, my son was about to get a haircut and my older daughter was with me in the car, and a song kind of came up. It was Same God by Elevation Worship. And we actually played it at camp. My daughter was not old enough to go to camp last year. She will be this year. And she just started asking questions about the song. She was like, Dad, I've heard this song. This song's in my head all the time. Mm. And in those moments, she felt comfortable enough to say something. And then you just start guiding. You're like, well, what do you think the song means? What do you think, what do you think this says? And she'll start applying. I think, when it talks about the same God who did who showed up to Mary, the same God who did this for Moses, the same God who did this for Daniel, is the same God who's going to do this for you today. She's actually now starting to connect the dots as, no, Dad, it's the same God. That's why you're preaching on Sundays. And man, it really blessed me to even have that conversation. But it's in those moments where you get to see, because they're so in close proximity to you. You get to guide those conversations.
Yeah,
man, I love that. And I remember having a revelation one time about the whole raffle ticket that says you must be present to win.
Oh,
right.
Wow,
this whole idea.
Great example. Yeah.
In our families, because you can be in the room and still not be present.
Absolutely.
Right. Especially in this world we live in.
Right.
Distractions and entertainment, social media, and everything else. And so I love what you're talking about, in that we don't want to sequester it and kind of, I've got my spiritual bucket, I've got my, health bucket, be a fully integrated person
in your family.
Right? And so I think that's so important, right? The idea of integrity comes from the word integer, which means a whole, right? Like a whole number,
yes,
indivisible, or not 1.31, So for things to not be segmented, but to be integrated.
Correct.
And in a family, I think that's a big part of it. And I love that you talked about that, like just really kind of showing up in each moment, not feeling like you have to put on your spiritual hat. Just never take it off. Just always be engaged in your faith and in your family. How do you feel like, what would be a practical way to help people remember that, just in everyday life? What are some things that maybe help you kind of stay present so that you're available when your daughter asks that question?
Yeah.
And it's not like, we don't have time for that. I'm trying to, like, what are some things that help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually talking to a good friend of mine, and we went out to lunch the other day, and he said, man, I work really hard for my family, and for hours and hours, like I'm at a call center, I'm making phone calls to all these people. And then I come home and I know I work hard for my family. Yeah. I get this. I come home, I sit on the couch, and the first thing I want to do is start scrolling through my phone and look up Instagram, look at Facebook, and because I'm tired, and that's real. I don't want to discredit that
that's
at
real
all.
life, right?
Like I go to work all day, and sometimes I have emotionally taxing days, physically taxing days, and I want to go home. I just want to sit on the couch, but when the kids come home from school, they're already kind of away from you, right? So when they come home, that's a moment where, hey, get off your phones. Get off the computer. If you could even take a couple hours before they even go to bed. So somebody else is not raising your kid. You are raising your kid. You see them. And this friend told me, he said, the voice of the Lord convicted him right there and said, hey, look up. And he saw his kids playing on the carpet. And he just said, since then he deleted everything. And this is not a call to action, delete all your social media.
But you're fasting, so you should.
Oh, that's right. So if you are fasting, take it from me.
That's right.
It's a good opportunity for you to practice what I'm saying.
That's right, yeah.
And our kids are important. Our wives are important. They want to see you present, kind of what you're saying. And so those moments that you have at home, you want to set boundaries around those moments. There's a joke that my team has with me. They're like, man, Prabu, when you go home, it's so hard to get a hold of you. That's because I try to be present. sometimes I have a basket. As soon as I walk in the house, I put my keys down and my phone or whatever. I just set it in there, and I play with my roughhouse with my kids. I play with them. And sometimes I work on homework with Riley after dinner. Family meals, that's a big one. If you can put that together, that's a good time just to kind of get conversation going. Yeah. But there are ways, if you're just intentional, as soon as you come home from work and you see your kids, just don't push them to the sides because they're important.
Good. Yeah, my son is just now old enough where once or twice he said like, "Daddy, get off your phone." And then you're just like, wow, I'm the worst human in the world.
Get off your phone.
Yeah, that if you want to be convicted, just wait for your 3-year-old to tell you to get off your phone.
Being able to do things together with your family. I mean, we decorated the Christmas tree together, and if Riley's now taken an interest into baking, and like she'll help Wendy put salads together or bake, and she'll just kind of sit there. And so as long just do things together. Try to do things as much as you can together. Even on the weekends. I know everybody's tired. I know we've got a lot going on, but our first ministry is our household.
Yeah.
So.
Pastor Nathan, I want to hear a bit more from you on how have you seen kind of the Jesus discovery path worked as your kids have gotten older? There's one thing for us with really young kids who are asking all the questions, but you got grown.
Yeah. And then people watching and listening have adult kids, and it's the same in every season, and it's completely different in every season, and really I think something that Tamsy and I have navigated with our kids is, trying to find that balance of letting them own their own faith.
Yeah.
Right? Because you do, as a parent, as a leader, you want to lead your family. We're talking about, how we do this in our family. We want to lead. But there does come a point where, just like in society, kids have to kind of become a citizen. They have to kind of own their own life, mature. It's the same way in your faith. Like it can only be the faith of your father or the faith of your mother for so long.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to really own it. And so, leading our families to that end, like that's something, I would just say that's something Tamsy and I've really tried to ask the Lord to show us. How do we do this to where it's not just, okay, you've ticked all the boxes, you go to church, you read your Bible, you pray, okay, you did it, How do you get your kids to own that for themselves? And I think, Prabu did a great job of just reminding us, the more you just are, that's who you are in your house. Yeah. There's no guarantee. I wish there was. I think every family at some point wishes there was a guarantee that our kids will just march forward in life following Jesus because we want them to. Yeah. But just, you have to be it. If you're not it, you really should not expect that it's going to have that impact. We pray in faith that God will help our kids, but I like to say you reproduce who you are, not what you think is important, So we can say, I think it's really important, but is that who you are? Because otherwise, it's hard to recreate it and reproduce it. So, you want your kids to own your faith, and it really goes even to how our marriages, how this affects our marriages. So how do we serve our spouses in this, Prabu? Yeah. We're trying to, be spiritual leaders in our homes, and like we talked about, there's different family makeups. You've got single parents, you've got blended families, we've got people who are married, and so for those that are married and they're trying to do this as a team, how do we do this in serving our spouses through this idea?
Yeah, and I think Jesus just laid the perfect foundation for that, right? And, as a husband, serving sacrificially for your family, but as a wife, to submit and love your husband, and then doing this as a team together. And sometimes because we're so, as a society, as people, we can be so self-centered, and I'm number one on that list. I lived a life where, I left home when I was 16 for college, and I've had to fend for myself for a while, and I'm bopping around in different people's houses for Thanksgiving and Christmas break.
Which for people listening, that is a true story. Like, you were 16. It's unbelievable, dude, that you went to college that young. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah. That's a whole different podcast.
Yeah. But and so I kind of came in with a lot of baggage of, I have to do this myself, and I have to do this, or I'm not going to be successful. I have to do this, or nobody's going to see me or value me. And then, the Lord brought, Wendy into my life, and we got married, and the first couple of years was hard. You know, like you go through this initial honeymoon phase of like, man, I love my wife, she's the best, and then reality hits, and then, you know, you're financially, it's tough, and you've just gotten married, and you're trying to land a job. Security is tough, and there are dreams and wants that each of you have, and you're trying to bring all of it together. And man, like, so this July would be 12 years for Wendy and I. And like I said earlier, like it's, there are seasons where I did this so wrong, and there are seasons where I did this well. Yeah. And in fact, like Wendy and I have been counseling for a good bit, like over the last couple of years. And so, as long as I try to keep her needs ahead of mine, right? And so I can lay my life down as Christ did for the church. I feel like that makes me love her. That shows her that I love her, and that shows her that I value her and I care about her. And we're a team in this. Like, as we raise our kids together, as we build our life together, we are a team. We will always be a team, you know? And even though we each have our own unique ways the Lord has wired us, but the Lord has also brought us together, and those things will complement each other as long as you keep each other's needs ahead of each other's. You know? And so I try to keep that in perspective. And again, there are times where I don't do a good job of that, but I try to keep that in perspective. And as I try to serve Wendy, I try to set her up. Like, what is the best thing for her? How can she be seen? How can she be loved? And, you know, even as the kids, sometimes I'll try to pit mommy and daddy against each other. Like, mommy said this and daddy said this. And I remember
that never really changes, just so you guys know. That.
My second kid can't talk, so that hasn't happened yet.
It's coming. And when they do that, like, they'll say, well, mommy said, and I always try to keep our language and our words in unity, right? So if mommy said so, then that's just how it's going to be.
That's what I say too.
Or like, you know, my kids may have a moment and they're arguing with mom or whatnot, and I would say, hey, that's my wife you're talking to. Exactly. You know, like that's right. Just kind of keep it in perspective, like that she's numero uno for me. Like she's number one, right? Like, and and what are ways that I can show her how much I love her? You know, so.
See, I love that you said that, and I just want to press on that for just a second, because our society definitely can be kids first in everything.
Yeah.
And whereas when you say that, that sounds so good. That sounds so like sweet and you know, loving, and obviously we want to prioritize our kids, but really in a marriage, your spouse has to come first.
Absolutely.
Because we have to present that unified front to care for our kids, what's best for our children. We love them best when we're together, when we're on the same page, headed in the same direction. Because too, I'm a little closer to this than you guys are, they don't live with you forever, you know? And you want that marriage to still be there on the other side, you know, so that you can be there for them. And again, we've got different families and pictures that are listening and watching right now, but I just love what you talked about, that mutual submission. And when we're talking about being spiritual leaders, you can lead from the front, you can lead from the middle, you can lead from the back, you can lead together. There's lots of ways to do this, and it's really recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of you as a team, and man, leverage those strengths and serve your family well. I think you said it well.
I can't think of the exact quote. We often mention this in our staff meetings when we're talking about the importance of structuring something in order and how order precedes, like we're talking about like the Holy Spirit moving that we, do you know this exact quote? I don't even know the exact way to say it, but the general premise is just that I think sometimes in a church environment, we can be so like, oh, the Holy Spirit's going to move, but then we think that we can be disorderly, right? And that's not true. Like we got to do our part and be orderly. And I think it's that same principle applies in our household in the sense of like, all right, like I want the Holy Spirit to be integrated into our household, and I want us to be Jesus-centered, but we still also got to be orderly. And generally, from my experience of being married, which is a little over 7 years, all the practical things like who did take out the trash or who did clean up generally stands in the way of whether or not we can connect spiritually, because those are the roadblocks, you know? And I was even thinking a little bit as you guys were talking about the dynamic of staff members here, that there sometimes is a trend of like, as someone comes on staff or whatever role, you know, their skills or aptitudes show up because you notice that they're interested in this or that. And so there becomes some room to move towards it. And I think when in the context of marriage, we can't be afraid to also view things that way. So for instance, in my household, I do almost all of the cooking. And that's not because my wife can't cook as much as she doesn't want to. She doesn't like it. She has no interest in it. And I do. So rather than it being like, well, this is what I saw in a movie that you should cook or something like, well, I would like to. So sometimes I think being able to step up in an area that's maybe not as normal for certain families because you have an interest or aptitude helps actually open a door to be a spiritual leader because you're not saying it has to be the specific way and you displeased me or something.
Yeah, and I believe it speaks to being a team, and Pastor Nathan, you said, our culture could be kids first, but I also think our culture could also be me first.
Very much so.
And
absolutely.
But that's where it's not a team, it's me, right? And I remember, a counselor once told me, he was like, man, what are your dreams and ambitions? And I said, my dreams and ambitions, man, like I just want to serve the Lord. Like I want to sit at the feet of Jesus. I want to minister. I don't care if I'm ministering to the youth or the kids, or I just want to minister to the Lord. And he's like, man, do you think you've gotten all that? And I was like, I think so. And he said, well, what was her dreams? And I remember like all of a sudden I kind of just sat there for a second because I remember early on when we were dating, she would talk about, man, I have a heart for the Jewish people, for the Middle East, and all of a sudden, like just over the course of me pursuing mine, like it just disappeared, and like it hit me. And I believe the Lord convicted me in that moment where, hey, it's not about me. I don't want to do this if it's her losing to make me win. Yeah. It's how we win as a family.
How do we win?
Right? Like
so
together.
Good, dude.
So it's supporting each other in what your goals are and who the Lord has called you to be. And like coming back to the spiritual household of the spiritual leader of your household, whether it's your wife or your kids, is to govern all of them towards Christ.
So good.
Is to push them more towards Christ.
So good.
Yeah. I think we as believers can get really afraid of the word compromise because you don't want to compromise your faith, right? In the context of marriage, though, compromise is one of the more important features.
Yeah, for sure.
Often when I would be meeting with younger people who were considering marriage, and like you said, they have different dreams. Sometimes their dreams require for one dream to be on this side of the United States and this dream to be on the other.
Yeah.
And if you really are going to make it work, you both have to find compromise to say, I value more this marriage than I do that dream.
Right.
And then I think when you submit those things to the Lord, he finds a way to surprise you with the dream in a different way that
absolutely.
You didn't expect.
And that's where his ways and thoughts are higher than ours. As long as we stick to what we can do based on what he's asked of us, then the Lord's going to direct our steps.
Yeah. Now, in this season of the Selah podcast, we have a whole episode on prayer because, fasting and prayer are united in that sense. But when you think about prayer in the context of being a mother or father or just a married person with a busy schedule, what are some advice that you have that would help someone to actually find time to do it, or rhythms that help you to start that?
Yeah, it's the word that comes to mind is discipline, man. You just have to be disciplined to do it every day, right? Like, or have a space where your kids know, your wife know, like, man, he is seeking the Lord. Because that gives them the confidence and the assurance of like when we are governing, them like as men in our families, like trying to say, okay, I'm pointing you more towards Christ. We have no equity if they don't see us, seeking the Lord ourselves. So, what I try to, busy or not busy, like I try to find ways to, seek the Lord in what I do. So usually like I'm off on Fridays, I'll get in my car and I'll go for a drive and I'll just, okay, Lord, you and me, like we were talking this through. And this is something that I've had since college. Like, when like my car has always been my space where I'm talking to the Lord. And when I come into the house, I make sure when I wake up, first thing I do is, can I have my quiet time? I write a couple of points down in my journal, and then I could jump in the shower. I'm just constantly thinking too. But and then when I put my kids to bed, that's another thing. Like I just talk to them, especially like I'm walking through this with Quinn, my middle child right now, and she will just kind of go on well, Jesus is awesome and Jesus is beautiful, and what she's learning in our preschool ministry, but then to guide those things and to just even pray with them in those moments. And then invite them to pray with you. Right. And, so just making sure that our kids know and your wife knows that you are one, that you are a man of God. And then they see you seeking the Lord. But two, it's just being disciplined enough to do it as much as you can, every day, and finding ways to do that.
Definitely.
That's so awesome, man. And it is, each person's different. For you, it's taking a drive. For someone else, it may just be getting up early or staying up a little later, or
the shower. Like I've heard all kinds of,
It's so true. And so just kind of finding it. And I do think you made a great point. It's important that our families see it. I mean, I have vivid memories of walking in the room and seeing my dad on his knees.
Come on,
knowing he was praying, knowing that, for me growing up, my mom was always the early bird. And so I never remember getting up before she did and coming and seeing her sitting at the table with her coffee, her Bible open, reading. I may not know what she was reading or praying about. I just knew that she was. And man, just that impression that made on me, even to this day, I still think about that a lot. And so, how do we we're talking about this in our families in the context. How do we keep the communication open and flowing? How do we talk about these things? How do we kind of help, again, married, unmarried, single parent, blended family? How do we keep the communication on these things going so that we can honor the Lord in our homes?
Yeah, in Proverbs, Solomon writes, don't provoke your kids to anger, but through discipline and instruction. And also, raise up your child in the way they should be so they don't depart from it when they grow up. So in those two things, I've heard it said this way, don't make it weird, right? Like just
I love that.
Just keep conversation flowing, whether it's things that are really, from an adult's perspective, it's things that don't matter, or whether they do matter, like you just keep the conversation going so your kids will know that they can come to you about anything, right? I remember I trained my volunteers with this. I said, hey, sometimes kids will come up to you and pray for the deepest, just the deepest, darkest things that's going on in their life, and you think it's like a move of God, and you want to pray with them. But also, there's going to be that kid who comes up and says, "Hey, I want you to pray for my hermit crab." Like he hasn't moved in like a day, or like whatever it is. And,
that's a bad sign.
Yeah, that's a bad sign.
That's right.
It's a bad sign. But I told him like, "Hey, you hold their hand and you pray." Yeah. Like it's the most important thing. One, because it teaches the kids that you can go to God about anything.
So good.
But in our household, I just try to keep it just open communication to anything. Like, hey, like I'm not here yet, Pastor Nathan, but like if it's a conversation about a boy, if it's a conversation about, like my son wanting, like, hey, I kind of like this girl, like just invite all of these conversations. I would rather them find out things under my household.
Love that.
But as long as we don't make things weird, like, so we are able to have those conversations with the kids. So I wouldn't, like, sometimes, we have the tendency to say, hey, let's not talk about that, or let's not do that at the dinner table. I think it's important to find moments where you can sit down with your kid and explain things or talk to them and open that those questions. And the best way to learn is like our kids, they're so curious and imaginative, like just play into their curiosity. Like let them ask tough questions and big questions. But as long as you are there to help them out with those things, I think it's a good sign for them, as they're growing up. And so when they do grow up, they don't depart from it.
Love it.
And it makes me think of advice I would give youth leaders always, which is when you get asked a question by a student and you don't know the answer, this is going to blow your mind, say, I don't know.
But I'll find out for you.
Yeah, but I'll find out for you. You remember.
If more people would just obey that. I just hang to that. That's so helpful. Yep.
And I think as parents to have a little bit of leeway to say, be able to tell your kid, I don't know, but I would like to seek that answer.
Yeah, let's find out together. Or let's
but can I say follow through is so important there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because you can't just like leave it open ended. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, good luck. I don't know, but good luck. Like you have to follow through because then it will actually make them say, well, my dad's going to find out, my mom's going to find out. They're going to help me through this.
They're going to help me.
So they're not going and seeking answers somewhere else or from people or from that we may not know, right? And so it's just keeping that communication that's open. Just don't make things weird. Like that's the rule for me. Like there's no weird conversation in the household. Just go.
Awesome. Well, Pastor Prabu, I feel like you've given us much to chew over, to think about. So we thank you for that.
I'm trying to figure this out too.
Yeah. And so to our viewers and listeners, I just hope that you feel challenged, even if you're starting a marriage, you're way deep in it and you feel defeated. I mean, I feel like there was some big takeaways, but some that stick out in my brain is both, first off, to just make yourself present, because you can't win if you're not present. Yeah. And also go on the journey with someone to be able to say, I'm not exactly sure how to do this or what the answer is, but we can come to that conclusion together.
Pastor Nathan, Jacob, can I say one thing before I get out?
Course,
I actually heard this being said that up until a kid is 14, their outside shapes their inside, and after that, their inside shapes their outside. So that age until they're 14 is so critical that we're there and we're able to guide them in those decisions, not to shut things down, but to kind of help them approach life and guide them and navigate through life. But after that, their insides is then going to start informing their brain on what the outside world is, right? So if you've got kids under 14, I just want to make sure that I put that in there because I feel like it's important.
Awesome.
So good.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Got it, man.
It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to our 2024 Selah podcast. We're so excited that you guys decided to join us. Here's a quick update for all our Refuge kids out there. This week, we have an incredible challenge where you get to honor somebody who's a spiritual leader in your life. We've got a couple challenges for you guys. Look through your notes, track it in your log, and we'll talk about it on Sunday. We're so excited that you guys are doing this with us. Again, quick reminder, if you don't have a copy of that worksheet, you can find it in the show notes below. I can't wait for this next episode about worship with Pastor Trent coming to you this Friday. It's going to be an exciting time. Guys, for those of you out there, we love you. Have a great, great day.